In this first episode, we are going to introduce ourselves, define enterprise UX, and look at how enterprise UX relates to company initiatives and decision making. How do we even start this? um, so, Katie, you and I are starting a podcast.
We are starting a podcast, Andrew. Why are we starting a podcast? Because we have things to say.
Maybe we should start with who we are and why people might want to listen to us and why we think we have something to talk about. So let's start with you. You started your journey. If I Googled in Florida woman, Katie Schmidt, what would I find? Or should I have done that before this?
You definitely should have done that first, because you maybe wouldn't want to do this podcast with me if you had seen all of the news articles about me from when I went to school in Florida. Probably one of my most shining moments was wrestling that alligator back into Lake Collingsworth. But, that's really behind me. Now I just focus on the corporate.
You had an opportunity to be an alligator wrestler career.
I did, but, I passed that up to keep studying psychology and studying how we can make eyewitness testimony better and jury decision making, and eventually that led me into UX. And so I gave up the alligator wrestling life for that. I mean, some people would say I'm crazy, but I think it was a good choice.
I don't know. I'll have to see if there's a Marvel multiverse where alligator wrestling Katie's out there. But let's start with what's your degree? What are some of the things you did?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So I did my undergrad in Florida. I actually did go to Florida. I did my undergrad there at a small school called Florida Southern College. And I started studying psychology in my undergrad because I wanted to be a lawyer. And I thought that having a background in psychology would be super beneficial, right, for really getting into the mind of, my opponents and like really helping people make good arguments. So I went in with that intention, but probably in my second year, I met a professor there who introduced me to psychology and law, which is really the intersection of the two things I was most interested in. And I started doing all sorts of hands-on experimental research with people around psych and law. So I did things on eyewitness testimony. I did jury decision-making work, just really got interested and involved in that whole world of experimental psychology for law. And we started a research lab. So that was pretty cool. So we actually had the first psych and law research lab at our college and started really doing a lot of interviewing.
Yeah, let's stop there for a moment too and say what is a research lab?
Yeah, what's a research lab? So if you're not familiar with psychology research, we literally do psychology research on people. So we design experiments and we collect data with those people. They come into the lab, they participate in the experiment. They don't know what we're testing for, so it helps insulate for a lot of bias. And we take all that data, we analyze it statistically, and we publish it, right, if the results are meaningful.
And do you have some publications out there?
I might. Yeah, I might. Yeah.
Okay.
We can link those for our followers later if they want to read about psych and law.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover?
Not really. I mean, I really liked that area of research. And so I went and got a master's in actual experimental psychology, which is a really scary term, right? I remember when we first met and we would go introduce me to people at work, we would make sure we said that because we wanted them to feel a little bit like I was an authority figure. But basically, that means that I'm just had a lot of experience designing those studies for people, right? And figuring out the best way to answer the research questions that we have. So that's actually what I got my master's in before I went into the corporate world.
All right.
Now, what about you, Andrew? Do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, I have a little bit different of a background. UX wasn't a big deal when I started. or it was just getting started, I should say, because it's been around since 93 technically. But I started in IT and software, and a little bit of robotics in college. But then when I went out into the world, I got a software job, started making custom applications internally to a big, uh, a big enterprise company. And that's really where I was for many years, just writing code, doing database, back end, front end. But what led me to UX was when I noticed we were building some things, deploying them, and they're sort of the brainchild of these customers. And once we deployed them out, they didn't get usage. And that really led me to really look at, is this desirable? Is it useful? Right. I knew it was usable, but when we launched it, it was really designed for these executives who really wanted certain data, but not really for the people inputting the data. And so that kind of started my journey. So I starting with, some usability stuff and outreach to users, nothing really formal, very ad hoc. And this is where I think, anybody can do a certain amount of UX if I could do it back then.
I agree. Yeah.
And then I progressed, to a full-time position. We had a consulting or contracting company that was charging us a fair amount of money, saying they were doing UX for this really cool concept that was out there. But then they brought me in and I was asking, okay, where's the data? We're having a lot of issues with usability in that case. And so all my studies were showing the stakeholders of that application that there was a problem and there wasn't really UX. They're just kind of use it as a buzzword.
Right.
So they basically hired me to replace the expensive contractors, and really came in and kind of reworked that system. And that was my full-time job. But they started to say, what else can we use UX for? So they started deploying me on a process, the service management office process in IT. And I was looking into, how do we improve this process to continuous improvement? And that started getting me into things like change management for service changes and facilitating, gathering of innovation.
And talking to people too, right? Who were like part of those processes.
Yep. Talking to the people there. And then the other thing it got me introduced to is just like how to improve process and work with these Six Sigma black belts, rather than graphic design, process design, governance design, and then tying things to strategy.
Right.
About after, I'd say a year of that, our CTO said, I think we need more researchers. So we put in some requests and that's when we hired you. So your first jump.
Yeah.
And I think it took me about 2 weeks to decide, all right, I think we have a really good researcher here. There's an opportunity as an enterprise solution architect. And I could advocate for UX there. And so I moved over there and continued to help as you grew the team.
Yeah, definitely. And that was my first foray into IT, service design, the corporate world, everything. Like I had no idea what I was doing in terms of, all those things that you just mentioned. Like those were all brand new to me, but I did know how to talk to people to figure out what we needed to know, right, to make business decisions. So at least I had that part down, but the rest took a while to learn.
Well, yeah, but I would say we probably didn't notice. I just remember talking to our boss at the time and our director at the time of wow, she's really bringing in, you talked about, your degree and adding credibility and stuff. But also in the actual research itself, introducing more of the scientific method, giant research papers, but summarizing those in the executive summary. Yeah. But I mean, it when you hand that over, really impress the people we were doing the research for. So you brought this professional acumen to the actual research area, where I had all this knowledge of IT. I didn't really have that. So you definitely brought us up several levels and I don't think we would have grown as fast had we not had that like good presentation.
Yeah, and you guys took me in even after my terrible resume. So I feel like
Yeah,
that
okay.
you guys really took a
So
chance on me, and I appreciate that. But I didn't let you down.
yeah,
So
so for our listeners, to this day, to this day, hundreds of interviews. Katie's the worst resume I've ever seen.
worst resume.
It was it was pretty stark and did not do her justice here. So
Yeah, for my friends out there who might still be in grad school or looking for a job, have somebody not in grad school help you with your resume because they don't know how to help you get a job outside of academia. There's no way. So definitely go to other people you trust and get their opinion on your resume.
do a study.
Study. Yeah, why not? Let's just
Pops up. Maybe I'll pull up
force it.
something later.
It's great. Well, I mean, despite all of that, yeah, we definitely built something amazing, I think. And we're not going to mention where we were working at the time that we met and put this together, but I think that whole experience that we had together is really what made us want to share our knowledge, right, about enterprise UX and really get into what does that need and how do you do it, right? Like, how do you actually go about this combination of products and process and service management and IT from a people driven, right, user experience perspective? So I think it's exciting, right, to be doing this with you, Andrew. But I also think this is definitely a gap that's out there that we can help people with.
Yeah, I think when I moved from working inside a corporate world to a consultant um, for an enterprise software company, I I was blown away. I did not. I just assumed that everybody did this. I was in a bubble. So coming out, definitely seeing the need for it, and really seeing a lack of focus on enterprise. I see a lot of products and services that are external. So that's where I think that's where we want to build our little vodcast here is to kind of narrow into this niche, I guess, area. Um,
Both are good.
yeah. Um, but yeah, it's
Yeah, I think so. And I think you made a point earlier that I wanna kind of hone in on too for this podcast because I think it's super important. Uh, it's okay to not do super deep experimental research for UX on people, right? I
don't
mean,
get
having that
intimidated
background,
by
honestly.
Katie's credentials, right?
Yeah, don't be intimidated by me, right? I mean, it's great that I have that background, right? And I brought it and it's helped me, but it's also helped me see like where you need to go deep and where you don't. And so I think we really want this podcast to be about, helping people just start to bring those user-centered design principles into their jobs and enterprise and really just helping them make more people-driven decisions, right? And user-centered decisions. Uh, for their business. They don't need to be an expert, right? That's really more geared towards helping people just figure out how to do that where they're at, right?
Right, where they're at. And I think that's the other thing too is, I think the term UX sometimes gets in the way when we're talking enterprise UX, just because we're really talking about, digital transformation, change management, driving your strategy, just anything about running a company. And it's just adding another data point, right? So adding um, the user data, the information from employees, basically to help drive those decisions.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think really if I had to sum it up, right, what our main goal is, and tell me what you think about this, but I think our main goal really of this is to just inspire people, right, to be people driven in their jobs, right? Even when it's maybe challenging or not a straightforward path. We just want to help people not get too caught up in all of that hierarchy and challenges they have in their enterprise business environment and help them take a minute and figure out what's best for the people that are going to be impacted, right, by whatever those changes are. And those are typically the employees.
Mhm.
So really our goal is just to make sure that we keep this very people driven and enable people to actually do that part of their job simply and with impact.
Yeah, and I kind of like the aspect of um, this kind of nonpartisan research team who can remain unbiased. Because I also saw it help with, decision making where you had maybe two decision makers who didn't agree and they were making lots of assumptions. And we would just say, hey, why don't we do a little research on there and then see what the data says. And oftentimes you do the research and it wasn't like, oh, it's all this person or that person, but it also
Right.
uncovered stuff that nobody knew in that room. Yeah, no data, nobody was even thinking about a certain perspective from the employee um, that drove the decision in a completely different direction.
So true. And it gave those decision makers confidence, right? I think that's one of my favorite parts of my job when I'm delivering that kind of impactful research or insights. It's like you don't have to guess, right? You don't have to be in this position where you are being asked to make a really serious decision or a very expensive decision or a potentially impactful decision and not really knowing how it's going to impact or whether or not it's going to work. Uh, and so I think having that kind of confidence, right, that comes from having that extra data point, like you said, of talking to the actual people who are impacted by it or who are doing the process or using the product just helps make those decisions easier for people.
Right. Yeah. I think that makes you think of sometimes people suffer from analysis paralysis or, they don't want to make that decision because it has such an impact. So give them some data to make. And the other thing that we haven't really covered is like iterative, right? Let's make a decision. Let's then measure the outcome immediately so we can course correct if necessary.
Totally. So Andrew, what are some things we want to cover in our podcast going forward in some of our future episodes? Anything that, we want to get people excited about?
Okay. Yeah. So some of the things kind of looking to cover is digital transformation. That's pretty hot topic right now. And that includes a really good change management plan, the psychology comes in pretty strong there. And of course, driving that around company strategy. We can also talk about, there's also this thing, HR employee experience, which is encompassed in the enterprise, business outcomes, um, like we mentioned, process improvement. We can talk about governance, those things. I mean, there's certainly the UI, that's still out there, but I think there's a lot of information on how to improve user interfaces. So really looking to hone in on, these other areas. What are you hoping to cover?
Oh, I mean, I think all of those are great topics. I think the other piece I'm wanting to cover is this idea of profitless UX, right? Or maybe less tangible ROI on doing this type of user experience. I think our listeners will really benefit from our experience on that and how we've actually been able to convince huge companies to invest in this kind of research when there's not a clear ROI. So I think that's a big one I want to cover. And I also think just that decision making piece, I really want to dive in a little more on for our listeners because that decision making piece is really, I think, the power behind this type of research and knowledge.
So let's move on to what we're talking about this enterprise UX. So what does enterprise UX really mean to us? And what we see out there. I'll start with there's a really good website out there called uxmatters.com that has a whole area of enterprise UX. I think our definition, they're trying to define it there. They talk about software in the enterprise, and that's where I'd like to challenge that and say, what about all the other stuff that's not software, the process and stuff. So in our view, enterprise UX is not limited to corporate systems, but it's the whole universe that includes software, the workers, and anything that helps them do their job. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And I think it's also that secret sauce, right, for making enterprise decisions. So it's how you go about building confidence in your decisions, what that impact is, maybe measuring that impact, right? I use the word measuring lightly, but measuring that impact. And it's sort of setting a very clear difference between, okay, what is UX for people in this very unique enterprise environment versus what is consumer UX. If we keep comparing them and trying to say, well, consumer UX is done this way, it happens this way, this is the benefit, we're never going to be able to make that impact, right, back to the enterprise UX folks. So I think drawing a really clear line, like you said, between those two things and how those two uh, approaches work is really important as well.
We want these videos to be collaborative with our audience. We hope you enjoyed this episode, but please feel free to leave comments with your thoughts on what you would add to the definition of enterprise UX or any other thoughts this episode sparked.